How you doing, guys? Welcome to this episode of Resin Maniacs TV. Sit back and listen as I interview none other than George Stephenson, pioneer of the garage kit industry. Welcome to Resin Maniacs TV. This is like our second episode, and pretty much what I wanted to ask you, as myself, as we spoke earlier, I'm returning into the industry, and we're trying to reach people who may not know who you are and would love to know who you are. So where did it all start? That's, I guess, the basic question.
Well, you know, I used to own a company called Geometric Design that I started back in 1989. And so from 1989 until 2003, I mean, Geometric was my business. And we did studio license scale model figure kits, mostly 1/6 scale, and then started doing some 1/8 scale stuff, but it was all licensed by the studios. And you know, when in the late 90s, the hobby industry started to suffer because young people were getting into video games, and even guys older our age were getting into home computing, radio controlled, and then you had statues coming along, pre-paints, and so all those things were things that garage kits were competing against. And all of a sudden we started seeing hobby stores going out of business, and then the distributors started going out of business, and we started seeing our sales slowing down. And then the bootleggers got a hold of our stuff and wiped out our international sales. And so, you know, I'd say probably around 1998, we really got kind of fed up. And we went to the studios that had licensed us, and we were telling them, hey, we got these bootleggers that are killing us, and we got everything you need to shut them down. We got samples of their stuff, we got their packaging, we got their websites, we got their catalogs. We even have their distributors catalog, and you can and they're using our pictures. So we got everything you need to shut them down. And I was meeting with the president of 20th Century Fox Legal, and he said, "Great, you got all that stuff. Great, we'll get on them. Who's bootlegging your stuff?" I said, "Well, it's a company in Korea called." He goes, "Did you say Korea?" I go, "Yep." He goes, "Nothing we can do." So what do you mean, nothing you can do? He said, Korean courts don't recognize Western copyrights, so it's not cost effective for us to do anything legal with them. And I said, well, how about the distributor? The distributor isn't Korean. They're in Baltimore, Maryland. You know who that is. Diamond Comic Distributors. I said, you know, you can do something about them. I got their catalog with bootlegs of our stuff in it. And the president, 20th Century Fox Legal, said, "George, we're not going to go after every little shop that has a couple of bootlegs of geometric kits." And so I said, well, I got two questions for you. The first is, why do we pay you all this money in licensing fees and royalties? And he didn't have an answer. And I said, while you think about that, why should I worry about you coming after me when I no longer pay you royalties? He didn't have an answer for that either. That was in August of 1998. For the next 5 years, we sold the hell out of Predators and Aliens, 20th Century Fox stuff, Star Trek stuff, every studio that had licensed us, and we didn't pay a penny in royalties anymore. They were ripping us off. So in 2001, I got appointed to the bench, the district court bench in Minnesota, and the chief judge in our district said, you know, we really want you just focusing on being a judge, you know, and so we really need you to phase out that business. Well, the business wasn't doing that great anyway. So I sold it to one of my distributors and just focused on being a judge. And then in 2009, my girlfriend, Mark Brokaw from Earthbound Studios, and Joe Simon, my sculptor, talked me into starting up again. And I started Blackheart. And you know, whereas before I'd always been into doing license kits, I decided, you know, with the experience I had had with the bootleggers and the studios not willing to do anything to protect us, they're not going to come after me if I do 50 to 100 castings of, you know, Medusa or, you know, the Terminator. They aren't going to mess with me. So that's what we started doing. We started doing 1-to-1 scale wall hangers. Nobody else was doing wall hangers. I didn't want to do anything that would confuse Blackheart with geometric, and just started doing it. And for the first couple of years, I thought, man, why did I do this? This is just stupid. But after 2 years, man, all of a sudden it just took off. And it's been taking off every year since. So now after a while, we had a bunch of people saying, hey, I like the wall hangers, but man, I really like the full bust. So we started doing full bust too. And that improved our sales. And we started doing airbrushing classes at the conventions. Because there are a lot of guys out there who think life size is just too difficult. I won't be able to do a good job on it. So we thought, let's get some of these folks to come to some airbrushing classes. If they're nervous about doing that, they'll have 6 hours with us with some good instructors and good materials, and they'll be able to see it ain't that hard. And we took off from that too. And then just the last couple of years, we decided to do some licensing. And we did our first pre-paint, which was Bela Lugosi's Dracula. And took off from there too. And this year we got Nosferatu, and everything's just moving forward. It's been fun, but it's been good.
Why did you go back to licensing?
The licensing that we went to, Cheney, Lugosi, and Karloff, because those are families. And we had dealt with them as families back in the 90s. And
they pretty much understood your plight.
Exactly. And I've been friends with them since the 90s, since they licensed us back then. So they were really cool people. And, a lot of people think, oh man, they're just rich people into the money. Number one, they ain't rich. Number two, they aren't into it just for the money. They are really into preserving the legacy of those actors and the classic horror film. And so if you go to them, you'd be surprised the kind of deal that you could get approaching some of them. And they're really cool people to deal with. And so we went to the families and started doing that stuff. The studio, that I have not been dealing with the studio, but now that we're getting into pre-paints, we're probably going to start getting into that too, talking to some of the studios about doing some of their stuff. I'd love to do Marvel Comics, but I know that's going to be way out of our reach for a long time. So we'll be looking at some little stuff. I'd love to do Bram Stoker's Dracula. So we're looking at getting licensing for that. But that's the kind of stuff we do.
As a kid, what were some of your influences? Was it TV? What was your first model kit you ever made?
Well, you talking about model figure kit?
You're 10 years old, and you're like, oh, how old were you when you first got your kit?
I didn't do monster model kits when I was a kid. I knew Aurora. You know what Aurora was to me? Thunderjets. You know the Thunderjets, racing cars, slot cars? That's what I was into. I was into that and comic books. And I only had so much money, I couldn't afford the models, and I thought they were too hard to do. But I was into monsters. I've always been into monsters, My folks were monster movie fans. Took us to the drive-in to see King Kong versus Godzilla, Planet of the Apes. Saturday night in Chicago, which is where I grew up, they had something called Creature Features every Saturday night, and they do a double bill, and usually it was the classic Universal monsters. Man, my sister, my younger brother, my older brother, sometimes my parents, we'd be up till midnight watching that stuff on Saturday nights. So I always loved the monster movies. But I'll tell you this. Growing up, there were three things I wanted to be growing up. I wanted to be a cop. I wanted to be a football player. I wanted to own a hobby store. And so throughout my life, wherever I was, if I drove past a hobby store, anywhere, I stopped and went in to check it out. And so I just finished law school. It was back in 1985. And when I went to law school, I worked full time during the day for a law firm, and I went to school at night. But this particular night, after I graduated, I was a prosecutor. I'm driving down the street, and I drive past the store, Scale Model Supplies in St. Paul. Damn, I've never seen that store before. I'd driven past it 100 times. Circled around the block, got out, went down. First thing I saw in the store was a big trophy case, and all the Universal Monsters classics were in there. And I was like, oh man, I remember those because they used to advertise them in the back of the comic books. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to buy one of these just for a large and build one. So Frankenstein, the Aurora Frankenstein, I bought that. And then I went back to the store to find some others, but they didn't have them. They said, but you know what? There's a whole little network of these guys that are making these things. And they gave me the number of a guy, and the guy was Terry Ingram, who runs Universal Monsters Army, the website. He lives in my town. And then I got connected to Terry Webb, and then John Green, and I started buying all the plastic models, and I was hooked.
How do your friends and family react to what you do?
Well, you know, a lot of my family members are artists of one kind or another. And so they look at this as, you know, artistic expression. So they dig it. They may not know the characters. Most of them, they know most of the characters actually, because everybody in my family is into horror and sci-fi. They may not know some of these characters, but they can appreciate the art of it. And see, there's an intellectual challenge to this whole thing. You know, taking something from concept to the finished piece and trying to figure out, okay, you know, what sculptor do I choose to do this thing that has the kind of sculpting talent to do this particular thing, and then how do we design it so it's easily moldable and castable, and then after we get that part, how do I get people to buy this thing? Now, how do I get more people to buy it? And so it's stimulating to me. My colleagues on the bench, they dig it. And a lot of them are jealous. They're like, wow, that's really cool. And when they go to my website, I mean, they're just blown away because their thing is going to be some silly looking stuff. You know, the quality of the sculpting now is nothing like there was in the 60s. I mean, it's so much better. So when you look at the old Aurora models, you look at those things, and they don't really look like, I mean, they aren't really accurate. You can tell, oh, that's Frankenstein. You can tell that's the Wolfman. But really, that didn't look like Lon Chaney as the Wolfman. So when I'm talking to people about what we do, that's what they have in their mind. It's, you know, something that resembles it. But when they see it, they're like, holy shit, that looks real. And you have that in your house? Aren't you scared? That's how they are. You got those things hanging on your wall? Are you crazy? How do you get women to come over? That kind of stuff. So, but they really appreciate the art of it. And, you know, I don't regard this as a hobby. When I'm sitting down and painting them, yeah, that part of it's hobby. It's relaxing, you know, it gets my mind off the crap that I deal with in the courtroom. I'm about trying to take this idea, this concept, and overcome the intellectual challenge to get people to buy it so it pays for itself and maybe make some money. And I just got to the point over the last couple of years where it's actually making money. And so I don't get, you know, I don't get very many people thinking, oh man, he's weird. Some people go, that's too scary, or that's too real. But they appreciate the art of it.
Tell me about this piece.
This is, a year ago I ran across a sculptor named Abner Marin. He's in Barcelona, I think it's Barcelona, Spain. And he did a piece that was an original piece called Caracalia. And it's a beautiful woman that has it's kind of seashell mixed with ram's horns. Really detailed piece. I had never seen anything like it. I fell in love with it. And we ended up working a deal with him. He licensed us to produce it as a bust. And the response was so good, and working with him was so cool. He's a digital effects artist in the movie industry. I said, hey man, let's collaborate on another piece. He said, yeah, I'd love to. What do you want to do? I said, I'd like to do a female android, something really cool. And he said, what would you like it to look like? And I said, well, I'm going to send you a bunch of different reference things. There are only a couple of things that I really want to have on it. I want the neck to be too long, like so it's kind of inhuman, and I want Angela Bassett's face on it. And he goes, Angela Bassett, yeah, that'll be cool. So he went to work, and he sent me, you know, the digital file. I was like, he nailed this thing. And I mean, he took my little piece of concept and ran with it, and that's what we got.
So that's a digital sculpture. Talk about that. Do you prefer digital sculpture, or is that Sculpey? Is it?
You know, most of the guys. He's the only guy that I've worked with so far that does digital sculpting. We have one other. Actually, there's one other guy that we're working with now that finished a piece for us. We're going to come out with it later this year. But Abner's the only one that we've used so far to actually take it all the way to a kit. I'm still learning about it, but one thing I know is that what he can do with digital sculpting, Yeah, you know, the top guys out there could do that, like a Steve Wang, you know, those guys could do it, but it would take them forever. Because there are certain patterns that are perfectly symmetrical on the first piece you did with the ram horn shell thing. Perfectly symmetrical. No sculptor's going to want to do that. It's too much work. And so that's one of the advantages of digital sculpting. You can do some things that would otherwise take forever. And, you know, you wear a sculptor out. So I don't have a preference for one or the other. I just want, you know, deliver me a great sculpture within my budget. That's what I'm looking for. If you can do that digitally, cool. If you got to do that with clay, cool. I don't care. Just give me a good piece.
How do you juggle your family, the bench, and the resin?
Well, you know, my kids are just about grown. My son's 23. He's a film editor. My older daughter is 21. She's going into her senior year in college. And she lives in a house with she's got roommates. She doesn't live at home. My younger daughter lives at home and she's working and she's in her first year of college. So they're all busy. But you know, I've always been real involved with them. We do a lot of stuff together. We watch horror movies together, Game of Thrones, you name it. We watch all that stuff. My significant other, my girlfriend, she is not so much into the horror and she likes scary stuff. She likes science fiction. She doesn't like the blood and guts. And so sometimes it's a challenge finding something in the genre that she'd enjoy. But she loves this stuff. She comes to the shows, she runs the table, she helps design t-shirts. A lot of the t-shirt designs we have, she came up with the idea for them. She's given me advice on some of the sculpting stuff. You know, I think you should change this. And she has a good eye. But she really digs the stuff we do. As far as career, man, if I wasn't doing this, I don't know what I'd be doing because the kind of cases, you know, my caseload is, I mean, I deal with some pretty vile stuff. So, you know, when I left Geometric, you know, I was out of it for 6 years. And during that 6 years, I didn't even paint stuff. You know, I was just focused on the law. My caseload at that time, I was doing felonies. And so, my girlfriend said to me, you know, you should get back into doing models. I said, well, why? Why would you say that? And she said, because your eyes light up. You never seem so happy as when you're talking about geometric design and the work you did in the hobby industry. And so, you know, she was after me for months to do that. And it was actually her idea to do wall hangers. I had this wall in my rec room. My rec room was 1,300 square feet. Okay, just one big ass room. And on one wall, I had a collection of African masks. And mixed in with that collection was a mask, what was a life-size head of Boris Karloff as the mummy. I cut off the back of the head. A predator and Pumpkinhead from the original cast, from the original mold. So they were mixed in with the African masks. And I was thinking, man, you know, it'd be fun to have a few more monster heads mixed in there, freak people out. And she said, well, you know what? You ought to do them. Why don't you start making them? If you want them, maybe other people will want them too. And at the same time, Joe Simon, my sculptor, was saying, hey, man, you need to get back into this. Mark Brokaw, hey, man, you need to get back into this. I'll mold and cast them for you. And I just started thinking, you know, it'd be fun to do that again. Because I did miss it. And that's really what it took. If she had been down on it, I wouldn't have. But she was pretty pumped. And if you were to talk to her now, she tells everybody that story. Yeah, the only time I ever saw him happy was when he talked about his monsters. But, you know, she's real supportive. She digs the stuff.
Where's the future? I mean, I would love to see a one-to-one resin, a bust of Kong, but that's not going to happen.
King Kong?
King Kong.
Oh, yeah, man, that's on our list.
One-to-one size?
Oh.
See, I'm teasing you, pal.
No, wait a minute. There was a guy who played King Kong, right?
Oh yes, okay.
You know, they had all the
They-
little
Heck,
finders,
oh.
so it would be
See,
one.
that's why I'm
to
only a
skip.
copy. You're a
Yeah,
judge.
see?
See, you
Yeah.
study harder than me.
No, we want to do a large scale Kong, and
That'd be great.
I've been thinking about it. I've talked to a few people about it, and the only question, well, there are two questions: when would we do it, and which one would we do? Would we do Peter Jackson's, or would we do the original? And right now, I'm kind of leaning toward Peter Jackson because he had so much more expression in the face, and it would just be a cool thing to do. But we'll see. We got other stuff that we're doing first, though. You know, we're going to do a couple more pre-paints and see how that line develops. We're going to do some more in this line. It's more female, half-scale figures, and see how they go. And then we'll be going back to, you know, the wall hangers and other stuff. So, trying to get stuff done pre-painted in China. You got to have. I got to pay for all that up front. I got to pay half of them before they'll start it, and then the other half when they're ready to ship it. And for Nosferatu, we went hog wild on that. I put the hand in there. I wanted translucent fingernails, and it's a full bust. And I also wanted to have them do a number of them unpainted, and I also wanted them to do a bunch of head and hand sets. We would sculpt the body so we could do the wall hanger. So it was expensive. It was a lot of money. And I just thought, you know what? I could try to finance this myself, but man, I'm going to be digging deep, and that's going to be painful. So I was seeing people doing stuff on Kickstarter, not kits, but other stuff, and I thought, well, shoot, let me look into that. And man, let me tell you, it was a lot of work. It was more. If I had known how much work it was going to be, I probably wouldn't have done it. But once I started, I was like, I got to make this thing work, because if I fall flat on my face, I know there's a bunch of guys in the hobby that are going to be, yay, he fell flat on his face. And you know how that is. Some people are just like that. And so I set my goal low, $20,000. I really needed more than that, but $20,000 was what we shot for. And we ended up doing a little bit better. I think we ended up doing almost 22. I could tell you, I was nervous. Our campaign was for 21 days. We started it on Black Friday. I picked Black Friday for a reason. 21 days. And let me tell you, I was sweating. But when we got funded, I was like, yes! Yes! So it was just so cool. But seeing all the people who stepped up and were like, hey man, you know, we're going to help you out. I don't have a whole lot of money. I'm going to buy a t-shirt. I'm going to buy that art print, you know. And some people kicked in a little extra money, you know. Somebody bought the art print and then kicked in an extra $50 just to help us out. And that's what's really cool. You know, you find out there's a lot of people that are behind you. And that makes up for all the little naysayers out there.